a touch of evil. Don't move, it's just a touch. It'll be over in a second. It's just a touch, you will not feel a thing. There you go. See? That wasn't all that bad. A touch of evil. Oh wait, no, this is dark Gothic. No, now I have to turn off the light to produce the darkness that will symbolically represent the darkness of the Gothicness of this game. What's wrong with me today? I don't know. Touch of Evil, Dark Gothic. This is a deck building game that clearly is inspired by a Touch of Evil franchise by Flying Frog Productions. That game is more on the very trashy side of things. This is a deck building game. It is a card game, pretty different from most of the productions by Flying Frogs that we've seen in the past. Even though the art is the same that you have in A Touch of Evil, some of the characters are the same, still the mechanics and the engine behind the game is so different from most of the games by Flying Frog that this really is its own thing. Touch of Evil, Dark Gothic. Players build their decks in order to become the coolest and most effective monster hunter of the group. And they do that in a fashion that is very similar to what you have in another deck building game, which is Ascension. There are pretty strong similarities between this game and Ascension. Yet there are also differences that I think make this game something different from just a clone of Ascension. In any case, let me show you how the game works and how you can become or try to become the coolest and most effective monster hunter of the region. This game uses several different decks of cards. There is a small deck of villains. Villains can be level 1, level 2 or level 3. At the beginning of the game you choose one villain per level randomly and you form them into a stack with the 3 at the bottom, level 2 on top of that one and level 3 on top of the villain deck and face up. So there will be a villain available at the beginning of the game for the players to fight. And as soon as that is eliminated, you reveal the level 2 villain. When that is eliminated, you reveal level 3. And when that one is eliminated, the game is over and you count victory points. But there are also ways in which the game may end earlier than that if all players lose the game. There are situations and conditions that, if met, will make all players lose the game. So it's semi-co-op. All players may lose the game, they may want to try not to all lose the game, but then only one player will win the game if not everybody loses the game. Each player has a hero card, which is assigned to the player at the beginning of the game. The hero card tells you the composition of your starting deck. This is very different from most other deck building games in which players do not all have the same starting deck. You have starting cunning cards, spirit cards, and combat cards. They all have the value of 1 in their respective category, cunning, spirit, or combat. You also have a card with a value of 1 in the category of honor, which is sort of like a wild card. Honor, silver, can be spent as any resource, and cards that have a cost in silver in honor, they can be paid for by using any card. So, you look at your starting card and you form your deck. This guy would put in his starting deck 3 combat cards, 2 cunning cards, 6 spirit cards, and 1 honor card. Different combinations for different characters. Also, each character has different ability which can be used during the game whenever the ability applies. You form your starting deck, shuffle, 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 you give yourself 6 cards, and then it is time to play the game. When it is your turn, you use your cards to defeat monsters, or to acquire allies, or to acquire gear, to trigger events, to discover and conquer locations. In game turns, you spend resources to buy stuff from that central area there. There is a large deck of cards which has events, minions, allies, all sort of things that will come out of that deck. At the beginning of the game you draw 6 cards and you form a center line there, much like you have in the game Ascension. If you play that game you kind of know how that works. Some cards may have mystery effects that apply when the card comes in play, and then cards have a cost that you need to pay to get the card into your deck. If it is a minion, then you see the cost as defeating the minion. If it is an ally, then you convince that ally to come with you. Once you pay the cost of a card by spending the cards from your hand, then you simply put the card that you acquired in your discard pile, and the card will then get back into your hand once your discard pile is shuffled and you use the new deck to get cards from. So I think it goes in the discard pile, then comes back in your hand after being reshuffled. Typical deck building mechanics. Different from other deck buildings though, cards keep coming out of the main draw deck. So whenever a card is removed from the center line because it has been purchased, or maybe it has been destroyed by game effects, you immediately draw a new card from the main deck and you replace it, so that there will always be 6 cards available in the center line. That means that the center line may change as your game progresses, as your turn progresses, during your same turn, during the very turn. This means that the center line may change during your turn. As you're taking your turn, you buy a card, another card comes out, and maybe with the resources that you still have available, you're able to interact with that card in some ways. And as you can see, cards have a cost here, and as I said, sometimes they have an event that is resolved as the card comes out. In any case, they will give you an advantage that is printed at the bottom of the card. It may be an action they can perform when the card that comes back in your hand and you play it. It may be a resource that you receive. This minion, for example, gives you a silver resource, but then you also have another ability. You may destroy a card in your hand or discard pile. And as in many deck building games, destroying cards can be good, because the cards that you start with are okay at the beginning of the game, but as you acquire better cards, you want to get rid of the lowest values, or the ones that are not as useful, so that your deck is more efficient, because the valuable cards come back in your hand more often. Also, another type of card that you can acquire is training cards. By spending 3 resources, you can get a training level 2 in combat, level 2 in cunning, or level 2 in spirit. Level 2 maybe is not the right word. It simply means that a card of the training category will give you 2 points instead of a single point that you have from that you receive from the starting cards. There is also a way of thinning the deck, which is thanks to the Hungry Dad. There is only one card, but endless Hungry Dad are represented by this card. This is an eternal minion. It always stays there. You always have a chance of choosing to fight that minion by paying the corresponding resources. As an effect, when you fight that card, this card, you may destroy a card you have played this turn, or a card from the center line. It can be a way of removing resources from there, but most likely you will want to use it to thin out your deck and improve the effectiveness on your deck, of your deck. The card always stays on the table no matter how many times the card is attacked. The mother of the Hungry Dad is always pregnant. That's how I see it. There's also a deck of dark secret cards. Ooh, there are dark, mysterious, evil effects that will force you to take a dark secret card. It goes in a discard pile, will go back into your main pile, and then will get into your hand later. When you have a dark secret card in your hand, you need to play it before any other cards, so it is automatically triggered when it is your turn, and you must destroy it. But what you do after you destroy it, you draw a shocking discovery. I'm so shocked I can't even tell you what these cards are about. Yeah, I don't want to spoil the effect for you. I want you to find out what the shocking discovery cards do. Most is bad stuff. Most is bad stuff that you don't want to happen. Not necessarily. Sometimes there have been surprises coming out of the effect generated by the shocking discovery. It adds more variety and more unpredictability to the game. And you also have a die, a nice looking plastic die, which you do not see very often in deck building games, but hey, what do you expect? This is a game published by Flying Frog. You need to have some dice, you need to have some plastic, otherwise the producers would, I don't know, get a heart attack if they just make a game with cards and nothing plasticky and nothing that rolls. Ooh, I rolled a skull. It's a die that has 2 skull symbols and then numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. There are game effects where you will have to roll the die, and depending on what you roll, certain effects will apply. If you're looking for a number, the skull is equal to a 0. In other cases, the skull will determine special effects. And this is the idea. You receive your hand of cards, you play it, you resolve the effects. Sometimes the effects will affect other players, will annoy other players. Sometimes players will need to discuss strategies so that they can avoid losing the game, they can avoid triggering certain conditions. The game continues like this until all villains have been eliminated or all players have lost the game. If the players have not lost the game, at that point you count victory points, and victory points are determined by numbers printed at the bottom right corner of the cards. So villains that you defeat will give you victory points. Cards from the center line will give you victory points. Not all cards will give you the same amount of victory points. Training cards, again, the improved version of the basic resources, will give you victory points. The initial cards, no, meh, that's a 0. All the more reason why you may want not to have too many of those. Well, having them in your deck does not really affect your score. It's just that you are missing an opportunity of getting more points from getting better cards. The game is fairly light, especially when it comes to the rules. I find the rulebook does a decent, maybe not excellent job of explaining the rules, but you set up the game, you get started, you reread some of the paragraphs as you're going, and the game becomes clear. There aren't too many doubts left by the end of the first game. I think that at least wasn't our case. So it's really light when it comes to teaching the game and implementing the procedures. But it still has options, it still has choices to make, and I definitely like the fact that the choices and the options change continuously throughout the game. However, the feel of the game is not always light. In a light game, you would expect the decisions to be made quickly, the game to go around the table quickly. Sometimes actually found that the pace of the game was a little slow. Not like you have in other deck building games, because players are creating their algorithms in their mind and they are maximizing the possible resources that they have, or that it can acquire, like it can happen in Dominion, which is one of the reasons why I don't play Dominion anymore. Things can become slow for other reasons here. Yes, the situation changes continuously, the center line can change at any time because players acquire cards or because card effects destroy cards, replace cards. But there is a negative side to this, which precisely is that a player may have thought of a general strategy, then the center line that is available when the player receives his or her turn is completely different from the one that the player was planning about before, and what happens is the player has to start planning a strategy again. And very often the player will have indeed multiple possibilities, the resources are fairly flexible, at the point you have to figure out what to do, so it may take some time as you're taking your turn before you evaluate all the possible strategies and before you choose one that does not just look appealing at the present time but may have medium or long lasting effect, medium or long term effects. So sometimes the pace was a little slow, it could get a little sluggish as things were going around the table. The game didn't last 5 hours, it didn't feel too long, it felt a little slow at times, but overall I still enjoyed playing the game. Even though sometimes the level of chaos, the level of unpredictability was a little too much for me to really form a strategy around it. There are so many effects, so many cards, so many things you have to take into account that I think it will really take multiple plays or many plays before players can come up with a general chain of actions, a chain or combination of cards that will form an effective strategy. It wasn't just a matter of acquiring random cards or having available resources each turn, or having random available resources each turn. It was more a matter of not really seeing the big picture, seeing cards that seem to be appealing per se, but finding it hard to create or to see synergies that you could build by purchasing different cards in different turns. And even if you see that synergy, then maybe the card will never become available when it is your turn, so that's another factor. It feels like a Zen adventure. You go in this mist full of monsters and dark creatures, you see what you encounter and you interact with that. Oh, that figure, oh, that looks like somebody nice, I'm going to recruit that person. That monster, oh, I'm going to try to kill that monster. Even though the procedure to acquire cards is exactly the same. So it's very different from Thunderstone, where purchasing an ally or slotting a monster is a very different thing. Here you almost get sometimes the sense, oh, have I killed this person? Oh, that's an ally. Have I recruited? Oh, no, that's a ugly monster. The theme is in the art, is in the flavor text, but you just feel like you're acquiring cards because they give you good stuff, and that allows you to acquire other cards with a little bit of a generic theme. I think maybe I'm sounding more negative than I mean to be. This is not a game that I disliked. I enjoyed playing it. It didn't blow my mind. It didn't shatter the earth under my feet. It wasn't as epic, say, as Thunderstone. It was more or less in the same category as Ascension, and it's a game that I would play when I feel like playing Ascension, which is in a situation where I want to play a deck building game, but without going through the process of a full game of Thunderstone. Something quicker, something more casual, something that I can more easily introduce to players, and players can immediately get the sense that they're doing something, they are acquiring resources, they are improving their decks. Even if then it may take a while before that plan gets to a point where the deck is really effective, still you get the sense that you're doing something, you acquire cards continuously. It is not that hard to acquire cards, and that is good. That gives players a good feel that they are actively involved in the game, even if they may not be getting such awesome cards. Also, the fact that cards have victory points, and the many cards have victory points, which is something I liked in Ascension, is something I like here too, because it means that the thin deck, the super effective deck, is not always or not necessarily the only way to victory, because you may have thicker decks which are a little less effective, but they are full of cards which give you each individually a decent amount of victory points, and when you pile those up, that can be a competitive deck. The super thin deck is not the only form of deck that is desirable here. I definitely like that you can go about victory in different ways. So, Dark Gothic, very similar to Ascension. Frankly, I prefer this one to Ascension. I think that the art appeals to me more, and the extra layers, the extra mechanics that you have around here make the game more interesting with more variety. The general lightness of gameplay, the general pretty high level of randomness that you have in Ascension is here too, so if you did not like that in Ascension, it is not going to be fixed here, it is going to be there. If anything, it is going to be more than you have in Ascension, because you have extra events, you have extra cards, you have die roll, but somehow it works. Somehow it gives me a sense of a game, of a world that it's a little bit of a maze, a little bit of a labyrinth. You don't necessarily know where you're going, you do not necessarily or easily picture the map of the place, but somehow it is a place where it's fun to wander around and to explore and to see what happens next. Dark Gothic, not a deck building game for maybe hardcore gamers or gamers that only play hardcore games, but for the rest of us, for the mere mortals, Dark Gothic is a good alternative to heavier, meatier and longer deck building games. And it is a good deck building game in its own right.